delivered a powerful speech in which he argued that the time was simply not yet right for independence. Dickinson had been a prominent patriot in the years leading up to open warfare, but like most patriots at the time, he still believed that the place for the colonies was within the British Empire. But as time went on, attitudes began to change, such that even Dickinson himself recognized in the summer of 1776 that the colonies must be independent. However, he believed that it would not do to simply declare independence. They needed to have some means to actually keep the 13 colonies as one unit. The Continental Congress was, after all, meeting on a very unofficial basis as the government for the colonies together. He believed that to declare independence at that moment in 1776 would be like riding out a storm at sea in a small boat made of paper. Not a particularly lot of confidence coming from him. Most of the delegates, however, agreed with John Adams, who argued very much in favor of independence. So, at the end of the day, they decided to postpone their vote to July 2nd in order to give the states that were still holding out, like John Dickinson's Pennsylvania, one last chance to join the majority, since it looked like independence was going to win, which it did. Pennsylvania did vote in favor of independence because John Dickinson and one of his allies simply walked through these doors and out of the room in order to not be present for the vote. They knew that they would vote no, but that Pennsylvania had to be on board with the independence the same as the other states were. So thus it was that on July 2nd, 1776, the Continental Congress said the United States was herefore independent. Of course, that's not the day we celebrate, because they still needed to approve a Declaration of Independence. They spent the next 2 days revising Thomas Jefferson's draft, much to his chagrin. He did not like any of that. And on July 4th, they approved it and sent it to the printers for publication. Once again, Dickinson wasn't here for the vote to print. This time, though, it's not because he knew he would vote against it, but because as a leader of a militia regiment, he was ordered to go in the direction of New York City to prepare to defend the city and the area around it from an expected British invasion that was already gathering inside New York Harbor. Dickinson was right on in saying that if the revolution was to succeed, they would need a new form of government, even if he was wrong in saying that that had to come before independence. So eventually, Congress worked out what it called the Articles of Confederation, which made the way that the Continental Congress had been running the affairs of the war the new official government of the new United States. However, there was a bit of a problem. The Articles of Confederation still left all real power with the states, rather than the national government. And this was done on purpose. After all, a big, powerful government far away that wasn't answerable to the people living there was the exact same problem they had started a revolution to prevent. But still, things were just not working out. Congress did not have the means to resolve disputes between the states. It had a huge issue paying off the debt for the war. Even though the war was won, it still looked like the peace could be lost and the revolution might still be over. So I have another question. What do you do when things are just not working out? You can actually answer that if you want. You can fight harder. Do something different. In the case of the Confederation, they decided that they would send delegates back to this room in Philadelphia to try to revise the Articles of Confederation. But that's not what they ended up doing. Instead, they ended up working to create a whole new constitution, which is why we call this group the Constitutional Convention. They decided that the main national government would have to have a whole lot more power than the Articles of Confederation did. And to get around the issue of this becoming some sort of unaccountable government that answered only to itself and would override local decisions, they decided that instead of just having one, they would have 3 branches of government, each with the ability to oversee the others and be sure that nothing got too out of hand. A system that we call checks and balances. They also decided that representation should not be based simply on, well, each state having 1 vote. Instead, all of the states would have their representation be equal in the upper house, the Senate, and the lower house, the House of Representatives, would have each state receive a number of representatives based on how many people lived in the states. They also handled the accountability issue in a way that, in some ways, was a little frightening to some of them at first. They decided that the voters in the states themselves would directly elect the representatives to the House of Representatives. They would also indirectly elect the president by picking people to vote for the president in what they call the Electoral College. The Senate, the upper house of the legislature, would not be directly elected by the people, but instead would be sent by the state governments themselves, since the Senate was meant to represent the states. As for the court system, well, again, not directly elected by the people, but the president, who was indirectly elected by the people, would nominate judges, and the Senate, which was answerable to the states, which were elected by the people, would be the ones to actually confirm those appointments or not. One delegate who was not afraid of the idea of letting ordinary voters pick the leaders of the country was the oldest man in the room, 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin. Franklin had a very long career in public service. He had originally started his career as a politician in this very room as a member of Pennsylvania's legislature. Then he would serve in Britain as their unofficial representative to the powerful people in the British Empire, would return to help write and sign the Declaration of Independence, go back to Europe, this time to be America's main diplomat in France, and return as a very old man who had difficulty walking around and moving. But he still attended nearly every single session of the Constitutional Convention, offering his thoughts and opinions. Sometimes they would be heated, other times they would be dropped. And as he admitted at the end of the convention, every day, looking at that chair right there, that chair is the only piece of furniture in this room that we know was in here during the historic period. What caught Franklin's attention was the sun design on the back of the chair. And he said that he had often been asking himself whether this design was a rising or a setting sun. And as he told this to the other delegates, he reported that he had the happiness to know that it was, in fact, a rising sun, and that the changes they were making for how the government would work would prove to be a new beginning for the United States, and that the revolution was not yet over. So, once again, the group of men in this room began the world over again. The American Revolution was successful, but there were still things that they were not willing to do. Slavery remained legal. Women could not vote. Free black men, even those who owned enough property to vote if they had been white, were still, in most cases, completely disqualified from voting. So it would be up to future generations to work to continue to begin the world over again. Take, for example, James Fortin, who I mentioned earlier. He continued this struggle for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, even as I mentioned, most of the white people who participated in the revolution believed everything worth doing had been done. On July 4th, 1876, to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the nation's founding, Susan B. Anthony and a group of other women suffragists came to a celebration for the country's founding and interrupted in order to present what they called the Declaration of the Rights of Women of the United States. That blue room we walked through earlier, on the staircase, in that room, the Liberty Bell used to sit on public display. And in 1965, students protesting the brutal treatment of African Americans simply demanding the right to vote in Alabama sat in around the bell and wouldn't let anyone get too close or touch the bell, as Rangers used to allow people to do, in an act of protest calling attention to the brutal suppression going on at that very moment. Also in the 1960s, LGBTQ protesters are walking outside with picket signs, demanding a very simple right that most of them were being denied as soon as their orientations and identities were forced into the public. The right to simply have a job and earn a living. So the work to make the world over again never truly ceases and has continued constantly since the time of the Revolution, since the Continental Congress and the Constitutional Convention met in this room. So as you leave here today, I would like you to ask yourselves, how do you begin the world over again? And what can you do to continue the legacy of the American Revolution? All right, folks, thank you very much. If you have any further questions, you could ask me outside as we exit. We're going to head out through the door we came in, take a right, and head down the stairs. I'll see you folks outside.